webinars. I'm so excited that we are rejoining together live in person worldwide after a several month hiatus. Thank you all so much for your patience and your grace with us as we reignite these beautiful Chi live gatherings. I want to just give a special thanks of support to all of those who joined as Chi contributors, making these webinar live streams possible and allowing us to fully share this out publicly with the world. We have so many incredible esteemed guests, as you know, who come, and we have one with us right now, Dr. Jude Currivan, who I'm so excited to introduce. And Jude, I know you have been so graceful in joining with us, taking just a moment to reflect on a leader of healing, a pioneer of healing research. I think many of us know that Dr. Daniel Benner passed last year. He passed last summer, actually. And I recently received an email, which was really wonderful news about really honoring his legacy. Daniel Benner was a pioneer in energy healing methods as well as research, and he was a huge influence on me growing up. Some of the earliest writings that I read on energy healing research were from him and his really wonderful books on healing. And the good news that his community shared was that they are keeping his legacy alive with free resources on his website. So as you know, very aligned with our social profit, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, this group has also provided free resources on healing research and more. And so I wanted to share those with the community first and foremost. So Jason, if you can enable chat so that we can kind of connect in with everyone, and feel free to say hi, by the way, in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from as soon as we optimize these permissions for you. I'm also going to send you a link to Daniel Benner's website. If you don't know of him, highly encourage you check it out and we'll share. So hopefully, Jason, you are getting the permissions, because right now in chat, I can only seem to text you and Jude. Okay, let's see here. Interesting. No, Jason, I still can't. So what I'm going to do is send it to you. And if you can connect in with everybody, that would be super. Just send them that website, because for some reason I can't seem to be able to do it. So apologize for that. So do check that out. And then I'm hoping we can all just have a minute of reflection for Dan and some collective gratitude, as I'm sure he can feel us through the ethers and wherever he is now, to let him know that his legacy, his passions, everything he did is still very much alive in our community, and that each of us that are joining here are taking up the work in our own ways. So let's just take a moment. With our hearts full of gratitude for all the pioneers of healing research and practice. There are so many among us, and now those also in spirit. We send our thanks. Such a pleasure to be all together again, and such a pleasure to have with us an incredible pioneer herself in healing perspectives, healing research, and continuously fostering the truth of interconnection. We have with us today Dr. Jude Currivan. And many of you know Jude, perhaps have read some of her best-selling books. She's the author of 7 nonfiction books, actually, some of the more recent award-winning ones being The Cosmic Hologram and The Story of Gaia. But I'll tell you a little bit more about her in case Jude is new to you. Dr. Jude Currivan is a cosmologist, a futurist, a planetary healer, and author. and a member of the Evolutionary Leader Circle, where she has been quite wonderfully active. Previously, Jude's incarnation in this life was a senior UK-based international businesswoman. She also has a master's degree in physics from Oxford University, where she specialized in cosmology and quantum physics. She also has a PhD from the University of Reading, UK, in archaeology, researching ancient cosmologies. Having traveled to over 80 countries and worked with wisdom keepers from many traditions, she's a lifelong researcher and teacher into the nature of reality. In 2017, she co-founded a social profit called Worldview, and we'll put that link in the chat, wholeworldview.org, to serve the understanding, experiencing, and embodying of what she calls unitive awareness, conscious evolution, and transformational change, underpinned and framed by a unitive narrative. She's a faculty member of Ubiquity University, Humanities Team, and the California Institute of Integral Studies. And in 2022, she was awarded Meshworker of the Year by Integral Cities. Jude, what a joy for you to be with us today. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Shamini, it's always my wholehearted pleasure to be with you. And I absolutely love the work that you and the team and the whole community at Chi are doing. I mean, I've watched you from the get-go. I remember when we first met in, I think, 2017 in Chicago.
That's right.
And you were really at the very beginning of this. My goodness, what a wonderful journey and service you've supported and nurtured and nourished, and ongoingly so. So it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. Yes, as you know, much like your work, I find all of my work really a labor of love, and I have been so nourished by our community, this beautiful community. And Jude, you've been a leader in so many ways in helping us understand the interconnected nature of ourselves and the universe. And one of the things that I know you're so passionate about is helping us all wake up to the understanding of non-separation. And let's just go first with this term that you have been forwarding in the community, in many different communities for some time, called Unitive Narrative. Mm-hmm. Explain to us what you mean by Unitive Narrative and how you came to that term.
Well, first of all, thank you. And like you were saying earlier, it's an emergence, it's an ongoing journey. But when I wrote the Cosmic Hologram in 2017, which was where when we first met, essentially, there was a sense that perhaps the book could be a seed for evolutionary change. And so at that point, I co-founded Whole Worldview. And at that point, a unitive narrative was not articulated. But over the next few years, and prior to the publication of the story of Gaia last year, what had been happening alongside all the research, all the scientific research on which both books are based at all scales of existence across numerous fields of research, was this understanding that is literally turning the old paradigm of materialism and separation on its head. And instead, what's being revealed is that our universe meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves from simplicity to complexity, and as a non-locally unified entity, which means that all the work that you're doing at Chi has a natural underpinning and framing in this emergent perspective. But of course, it's both a new perspective because it's based on the scientific evidence. But as you know, as a student, as I am, of ancient wisdom, and especially Vedic traditional wisdom, it's an ancient perspective that mind and consciousness aren't something we have, but literally what we in the whole world are. So I was invited to be a founding member of a group of change makers that had been working at the United Nations for decades. And most of whom, over 100 of them, 150, had been involved with the development of what we call the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. They were adopted by 193 countries a few years ago. And from them, something called Agenda 2030 came too. But these change makers realized that the worldview that was the main developer of the SDGs and the way in which they were articulated was based on this old paradigm of materialism and separation. And so they realized that these wonderful, really important goals, first of all, were responses to the dysfunctional behaviors of our dis-ease of separation.
Mm-hmm.
And unless we came together and approached them from a healed perspective of wholeness and unity and unitive awareness, that they would not be implemented. So as a result of that, one of the very first, the beings and the doings of this came forward was the need for a new narrative. Instead of, because we're a narrative sharing species, we've told stories around campfires and hearths for as long as it's meant to be human. But the last few centuries progressively have been a narrative of separation. And so what we did is we came together and we articulated a unitive narrative based on the emergent science, but also the emergent science as it converges with ancient universal wisdom teachings, indigenous teachings. And so what it does is it both not just recognizes, but it honors and respects our inner being and outer doing. It respects the complementarity of feminine and masculine. It brings all of this together in a very distilled way as a unitive narrative to underpin and frame transformational change. So that's been a lot of what I've been involved with, and we can certainly put links to the specific way in which the unitive narrative was articulated by these change makers that belong to an SDG thought leaders circle of the evolutionary leaders. But what we realized, because there's a section in there that's specifically aimed at the SDGs and how a unitive perspective and narrative can frame a new approach, a unified approach, a unitive approach. But we realized if we took that section out, then a generic unitive narrative can apply to anything. So we've now been working, and with many circles, on unitive economics, unitive education, unitive justice, unitive, which of course Chi does, of course, in terms of our whole being, recognizes this innate unity of which we're all microcosms and microcosmic co-creators.
This is really important. And as you know, so many of us here at Chi and our partner organizations are very much aware of and attuned to the SDGs as they relate to health and healing. And so I'm wondering if we can also talk about that specifically in terms of what does it mean when you say these SDGs have been created from a fractured worldview in the first place, right? And so the solutions that were initially proposed are also coming from a fractured worldview. Do you have an example of that for us, for those of us who haven't been following the SDGs very closely, and, what has been working and what hasn't been working in terms of trying to provide unity, for example, with relationship to health and healing?
Yeah. Well, I would say actually that a lot of the folks who are really involved in the development of the SDGs did come and do come from a unitive perspective, but there was so much that they were having to deal with that they realized, I think, that trying to sort of go from, where they were to where the whole rest of the world were at the time was a massive step too far. So I think what they tried to do was do the best they could under those circumstances. And it was a remarkable achievement to get as far as they could. But now there's a realization that we have to take many more steps along this journey to a remembered wholeness if we are to essentially implement goals which are great in the main. But part of the issue with all of this is I think twofold in the main. One is which there are a lot of folks who are really feeling that the United Nations of itself cannot resolve this, because the United Nations came together at the end of the Second World War with a profound mission, which was to bring the countries of the world together from literally 2 world wars. And so they did what they could in the ways they could at that time. But of course, they were based on nation states, and the nation states in themselves are based in many ways on a foundational worldview of separation. We actually have now a sort of a global society which is actually founded in 19th century mechanistic science.
Yes.
You know, our governance, our healthcare, our education, our organizations, they're all based on this materialistic, hierarchical, perspective. They didn't really stop to hear the clues that were given by 20th century science, the quantum physics and the relativity physics. That was pushed to one side other than technologically. So we have a worldview based on 19th century mechanisms, 21st century technologies, and are at an unsustainable existential point. So going back to your point, the goal, the SDG goal on well-being is still founded on that mind, body, not even spirit really, perspective, let alone an integral whole being perspective. But perhaps the one that really now is being recognized as being foundational, as a main domino, as it were, a main domino to do the for everything else, is economics. Because the way we have our economics, people have described as a death economy. It doesn't support life. It doesn't support well-being, neither of people nor planet. So I'm working with a number of leading economists who are looking to move towards a process of resetting, reforming, regenerating, and transforming economics as a unitive perspective. And interestingly enough, last month, it was the month before, the July gathering in New York for the high-level political forum of the United Nations for a week. I was involved in presentations in this perspective, and we actually have a unitive thematic cluster of 17 NGOs and growing, who are all now coming from this perspective. But the word in every conversation was the need to transform economics. And if we can transform economics to be founded on a unitive narrative, underpinned and framed by a unitive narrative, itself based on this convergence of leading edge science and wisdom teachings, and we can move towards, in a dance of moving to more life-affirming economics, and therefore a worldview that is supportive and framing that, then naturally all the other goals come into alignment, whether it be education or well-being or equality or non-exploitation of our beloved planetary home guy. They all naturally, when we come from a worldview of unity and diversity, we behave differently.
This is so beautiful and so important. I love the way you broke it down for us too. So for those of us who are just learning about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, there has been, over the years, a tremendous amount of desire to help right our systems. But as Jude is saying, because those systems were based on models of separation, we have to kind of move the framework. And this is really relevant to the work that we do, of course, as a community in the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. As my dear colleague, Dr. Richard Hammerschlag, as who I'm sure, our research director, likes to say, the biofield isn't a thing, it's not a modality, it's a perspective. It's a perspective of interconnection. And what I hear you say, Jude, is we don't even have to play small here, because this perspective of interconnection, of course, applies to health and healing, but it applies to equality and equity in so many different domains. And at the heart of it, as everyone has been doing their analyses of all of these things that we need to address on the global level, including climate change, which is not separate from health. None of this is separate from itself. the core kernel, the fulcrum of change, if you'd like to say, that's going to move everything forward in a greater experience of the interconnection and harmony that we know is possible, is to begin with what I don't know if I'm using the right term, regenerative economics, right? Or a unitive narrative as it applies to economics. And, y'all, I know we're going really big here, but why not, right? Because this is what we do. If we're talking about the biofield perspective, then, and healing our societies and planet, as well as ourselves and our ailments, then it's time for us to completely shift our perspective. I'm just so grateful that we're launching the series with this conversation, because this is what it's all about, helping all of us open to the understanding and the felt experience of interconnection. And you're doing this incredible work. I must tell you, I feel Barbara Marx Hubbard very much in this conversation, and no doubt she is supporting you in the work as, a fellow evolutionary leader and so involved in trying to write things for the world in the same way that you are, Jude. So I just had to name that because I feel Barbara with us, and I just think it's incredible what you're doing, and so your work is very much helping people wake up to the unitive narrative. Now, as you know, we're kind of science nerds here. The consciousness.
Oh, we're so science nerds.
So we're such scientist nerds. So for those who are also just learning about this idea of the unitive narrative and thinking about it, and thinking about the shift in worldview that needs to take place, how did you come to this with your exploration in physics? Because you spoke a bit about how this has always been here. You've been studying with different indigenous traditions for many decades in many different countries. You realized that this perspective has always been here, but you alluded to these understandings in quantum physics that are also showing the same thing. So can you take us through that a little bit more for those of us who are a little bit new to this area?
Happy to. Well, first of all, Shamini, I experience the world as whole and multidimensional since I was a very small girl. So my excitement when I was 18 years old to go to Oxford University to study physics and specialize in quantum physics and relativity physics was that I was going to be taught the bridge between what I was experiencing and, the nature of reality. And that was not the case. The leading edge science when I was at university, and the leading edge science in the mainstream still is a science of separation, but we did have the clues from quantum physics and relativity physics. So 100 more years ago, as you know, and I'm sure many of the folks with us on this call realize, the quantum pioneers were realizing that there is no separation between an observer and that which is observed, that when we observe something and measure it, it realizes it. Now, the wonderful thing about that is it opened up this perception of what's called non-local unity. In other words, there is an interdependence and an inseparability that extends beyond our physical senses to be able to measure and perceive. And of course, over those next years and decades, this was a foundational understanding of quantum physics. And it took many, many decades to be able to start to experiment to prove that. And it was proven that it extended beyond the quantum realm. And there's something called Bell's theorem, which showed then that for quantum physics to work at all, our universe in its entirety has to be non-locally unified. And only now, and this is why I get so excited about the nowness of all of this, is that in 2022, the Nobel Prize for Physics was given to 3 researchers who had been researching universal non-locality for decades: John Clauser, Anton Zellinger, and Alan Aspect. And Anton was actually involved in a 2018 experiment with a coalition of universities that were able to non-locally entangle, in other words, show this non-locality way beyond the scales that had been done so far. Because what they did was they entangled photons of light in their laboratory with starlight from 600 light years away, and they triggered a series of inequalities which passed the threshold that Bell had set for the proof
Wow.
of universal non-locality, triggered by a quasar, which is an active galactic center, 12.2 billion light years away. So that's a cosmological scale. Now, 2022, late last year, these guys were given the Nobel Prize for Physics for this work. And the Nobel Prize is really interesting because it's only given for settled science. So, for example, Einstein wasn't given the Nobel for relativity theory because it was too contentious. He was actually given it for the photoelectric effect. So we now have passed a threshold where what I'm sharing and what I write about in the Cosmic Hologram, the story of Gaia, is settled science. And the great thing is, of course, that when I wrote those books, I was looking for examples and evidence at all scales of existence and many different fields of research, and they're all telling the same story, that the appearance of our universe, its energy, matter, its space-time, are real, but they're not its fundamental reality, that appearance arises from deeper levels of intelligence and causation as meaningful information that literally informs all that we call our universe, that exists and evolves meaningfully, purposefully as a non-locally unified entity. So whereas the old paradigm had no place for all of the work that you are so magnificently doing in your community, it had no place for supernormal phenomena. It had no place for synchronicities or intuition even. This understanding naturally embodies and embeds it. And just to put the cherry on the icing on the cake, we also, as cosmologists, now more and more realizing that appearance is holographically manifested. Again, it's real, but it's actually a projection of cosmic mind and universal consciousness from the boundary of what we call space-time. So every step of this journey is converging with the sort of wisdom traditions that, you and I both honor, and I'm sure, our community honors, and especially the Vedic tradition of ancient India, because what I'm describing as a cosmic hologram is what the ancient Vedic adepts, rishis, would term Indras Net.
Yes. Yes. And as you said, so many cultures describing these in slightly different ways. Of course, given my background, that's what I'm most familiar with, and certainly has been explicated by others, including in modern times. Of course, Deepak is one who has been sharing about this, but there are so many texts referring to this understanding and so many traditions, and how exciting. I love this term, settled science. I just love it. And yes, I agree with you. Getting the Nobel Prize for these experiments in quantum physics help us understand, often, Jude, as you know, many of our healing practitioners will say, well, or even patients, or, just regular friends of ours who are connected to Chi will say, yeah, I talk to people about the biofield, but they hand wave and say, oh yeah, there's no science to that. And as you know, I've taken upon myself in some of the work that I've done with these TEDx talks and other things to really try to explain that there is really wonderful published science out there and more that needs to be done. And when we get all the way to non-locality and non-local healing and these things that so many of our healers now, even in the modern times, have been describing and have been experiencing through COVID, when people couldn't meet in person, and yet they were experiencing these deep healings across the seas. We really truly are beginning to lay the foundations of the understandings for these practices. And as we
Absolutely.
know, it takes time. So if you say, well, how come nobody's talking about this in the mainstream media? Well, they seem to be distracted by the disease of separation in the way that they report almost everything these days and what they think is important to report. It's very sad. And we are beginning to see this infiltrate other perspectives in science, certainly in the health and healing fields. We were just, as you know, Jude, we're going to be very excited to interview you for our upcoming documentary on healing, which we're working very hard at. It's going to be a couple-year project. It takes time to do this. But we've been talking with some of our healers on the ground because we're very excited to film some of this healing work that is actually taking place right now in real time, and how this biofield perspective is beginning to shift so that some of our healing practitioners who before would have had trouble getting into the hospitals doing this work are now beginning to train medical practitioners to do this work. So we are seeing this evolution in perspective on all levels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to add to that, Shamini, because what is really, I think, is taking us beyond quantum physics and beyond relativity physics, those pillars of 20th century science, as I mentioned, is, they are now seen more as the appearance rather than the fundamental underpinnings of reality. But rather than continue to use a language of energy, what we're realizing is the appearance of our universe arises as meaningful, digitized information, pixelated at the most minute scale. This is where the pixelation of reality comes into being, or what's called the Planck scale, which is as small as to a proton, as the proton is to the entire universe. But that pixelation, therefore, is able to embody enormous amounts of meaningful information at every quantized level, from quarks upwards. So this is meaningful information that is literally the stuff of our reality. So when we talk of healing, we're actually bringing in a level of perception now where our attention and intention, the resonance and coherence of our awareness, is like the energy is the waveguide, but it's our consciousness that is the impetus and the driver and the way shower for healing. And whether that's within our own healing or whether that's offering healing to others. And when I wrote the story of Gaia, I do write about biofield, and I'll be writing more about it in my next book. So again, it's a wonderfully emergent process, isn't it? Where this realization does take time, but I actually feel that this is moving so quick. I did 2 podcasts in the last 2 months. I've done 150 in the last year. But the last 2 months, the last 2 podcasts have reached over 720,000 views. And with enormous levels of positivity and positive comments. I think we're on the cusp of something now moving far more quickly than perhaps we thought it might.
It's a necessary movement, isn't it? Because we have to wake up to the reality of interconnectedness if we want to maintain and even evolve not only ourselves, but, truly, really, I think, as humans, keep our species alive. Keep our species alive. I mean, we have to evolve. It's kind of like evolve or die, really. I mean, I hate to be like that, but I have had many conversations now with leaders like you who are very clear about this. This is our charge, and it's a joyful thing. And how wonderful that this message is now being fully received, and I believe welcomed, across generations, with the younger generations, of course, really being born with that knowing and not having it knocked out of them the way perhaps older generations who are more steeped in these models of separation. We had it kind of beaten out of us, a lot of our older generations, that we really did. And we see that with the newer generations, it's not that. It's sort of like, oh yes, this is what I've always felt, and I'm embracing the science behind this, and I'm embracing what we know. And I love how you brought it back to us and the development of our consciousness. And I have some questions for you on that. And I also, speaking of questions, yes, we will have some time for questions in just a few minutes. I see a few in the Q&A box. I know that a lot of y'all have been with us for quite some time. So for those who are joining us who are new, I want to remind you that if you are joining with us live here on Zoom right now, On the bottom of your screen is a little box that says Q&A. Feel free to click on that and type in your question, and we'll reserve the last, hopefully 15 minutes of our hour with Jude for her to answer some of your questions. And I bet that a few of us have this question. What do you do in your personal practice, and what do you recommend for people to begin to more fully step into the experience of unitive awareness, so that it's not just narrative? Of course, the narrative is important, as we mentioned, for the SDG goals. You know, we have to frame the narrative, we have to speak the narrative, but most of all, as you always like to say, we have to embody it. And we do that through our consciousness. So what are some of your favorite practices for doing that?
Well, first of all, just to wholeheartedly agree with you. You know, when I co-founded Whole Worldview, it wasn't just to understand unitive awareness. It was exactly this, to experience, to serve the experience and embodiment of unitive awareness. What do I do? Well, first of all, I say what I do is for me, because it makes my heart sing. So I just invite everybody to do what makes your heart sing, whatever that might be. I'm very fortunate. I live in a beautiful part of England at the edge of a village near to an amazing sacred landscape called Avebury that's been honoured as a sacred landscape for many, many thousands of years. So just being there and being at home is my nest, is my joy. We've got a garden. I love growing vegetables. For me, I'm rubbish at growing things that don't get eaten. But if there's a chance of a meal at the end of it, then I'm very, very nurturing. So I love that. It makes my heart sing. We've got wonderful trees in our garden. I love being with them and the Devic realms. I'm a great ABBA fan. I love dancing to ABBA, and I love that one of my dear friends, Jean Houston, her theme music is I think Dancing Queen.
Oh, love it. Yes, my dear friend Anita Morjani loves to play that. We often play that and I think she plays it at her own solo events, but even in our joint events, there's Dancing Queen always makes it there, and the dancing begins.
Fabulous. I'm glad we're all together on this one. So it's whatever makes our hearts sing. And you know, it can be so simple. One of the things you were saying about the big questions that I just wanted us to loop back to is the other thing that we came up with at Whole Worldview was this realization that so often people say, what can I do? I'm only just me. And, you know, there's a wonderful quote by Margaret Mead that says, if you think you're too small to make a difference, share a night in a sleeping bag with a mosquito. And, you know, this is the point. So we talk about act local, feel global, and think cosmic. Because the cosmos, you know, we think, oh, it's out there, it's huge, it's huge. It is, but it flows through us. You know, my subtitle of my latest book, The Story of Gaia, is The Big Breath. And the cosmic and the evolutionary journey of our conscious planet. Because, you know, I was taught, like I guess you were taught, that our universe began 13.8 billion years ago as a big bang. We know it wasn't big, it was minute. But when we think of the word bang, it's like this chaos. We now know it's incredibly fine-tuned and ordered and as simple as it could be, but no simpler. And so it began more as the first moment of an ongoing big breath. So space has expanded and time's flowed ever since. It's an ongoing big breath. And the reason that came to me and resonated was I also understood that, of course, the word prana in Sanskrit means both breath and spirit. And again, that's the ancient understanding of our universe being breathed into its reality. And so for me, I invite folks to realize that in every breath, the universe is breathing through us. It's breathing its evolutionary impulse through us. So when I do that, that nurtures me. It nurtures my soul. It inspires me. It empowers me. Because I realize that literally we are inseparable, but also that each and every one of us matters. Each and every one of us is a microcosmic co-creator of the entire evolutionary journey and impulse of our universe, our beloved planetary home Gaia.
Oh, I feel that, Jude, and I know everyone listening feels that. I can feel that beautiful heart that you have, and the invitation. Let me see if I remember it correctly. Act local, think global, feel cosmic.
Feel global, because we're part of Gaia. So we have to feel that we're Gaians, but then think cosmic.
Wow. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that really, how beautiful. And what a beautiful invitation. And yes, we have some questions coming up. So let me bring those in. Just a reminder that if you have any questions for Jude, this is part of the beauty of us being able to join live. For those of you who are able to join live, go into Q&A and all questions are welcome. Look, this isn't about proving how smart we are. This is about all of us being together on our continued learning journey. So, okay, Maria is asking what series, and I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. What was the term that she used for the rishis referred to in the Vedic text? Sounded like injurious net. That's Indras Net. Indras
Indras
Net.
Net.
Yeah, Indras Net. Maybe Jude, if you don't mind, explain a little bit about that connection that you were making between Indras Net and what we're learning about the actual cosmological descriptions in modern science.
Thank you, Maria, for that question. It is Indras Net. And Indras Net is an amazingly beautiful poetic description of our universe and its reality by these ancient Indian sages. And it describes a universe made up of a myriad of gemstones. And every gemstone is of a different color and has many different facets. And each facet reflects the other gems, and each gem is connected by golden threads of light. So what it's saying is the wholeness of our universe finds its expression in this amazingly beautiful, diverse ways, and yet intimately interconnected. And the cosmic hologram is sharing exactly the same understanding at all scales and many different fields of research, to show us that our universe does indeed manifest as a cosmic hologram. The beauty of a hologram, as indeed in Indras Net, is that the whole is reflected and represented and embodied in every pixel, every part. And so every part has that intimate interconnectedness, interdependence with the whole.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Jude. Thank you for that. And John has put a very beautiful description of Indras Net as the quantum field that holds all of the Planck spherical units of the universe in place, he writes.
So right. And John, I would just add to that, go to a deeper level where we're talking about information, because information, meaningful information, we're finding expresses itself as the quantized, as the appearance of quantized energy matter, and in a complementary way as non-quantized space-time. So we don't have the time today to go into the details of this, but if you go to wholeworld-view.org, you can find a free reference to what I call a new insight of informational science that shares all of this. And of course, I write about it too.
Yes, please do. And we'll make sure to put your links to your websites, including wholeworldview.org, in here, as well as others. Please do, if this, as I'm sure it has me, it really intrigues you and you want to learn more. Jude is a resource of information. And as she mentioned, she also has other podcasts where she probably dives in even more deeply into particular topics, and many, many beautiful books on these topics. Suzanne, good for you to join us. And I see here you have a very, very interesting question here. And Jude, it'll be really great to get your answer here. Suzanne asks, do you think that the increasing awareness of unidentified aerial phenomena will help to shift the perspective of our place in the universe and how we view our planet? If it is confirmed that we indeed are not alone, we might be more inclined to think of ourselves as one species of many. And she's wondering if you agree with that, or what your perspective would be on that.
Well, thank you, Susanna. Yes, I do agree with it. Many years ago, I was guided that this would become a time where we would literally remember, not just intellectually, but literally remember into our experiential embodiment of who we really are, our extraterrestrial, our intraterrestrial, and our human heritage. And I feel that time is coming. And as a cosmologist, I've been watching with great interest over the last 15, 20 years as our technology has improved more and more. And we began some years ago now to discover other planets orbiting other stars. And as that technology has moved forward, we found many, many more planets that, some are rocky planets like our planetary home. Some are what are called super Earths. They're rocky planets, but they're much bigger. Some are called hot Jupiters. They're like Jupiter in our planetary system, but much closer to the sun. They're stars. But nonetheless, we're finding more and more planets that look as though they may well be able to be habitable for biological evolution. And these tend to be rocky, and they tend to be, the water is vital. And they also generally need to be in what's known as the Goldilocks zone. In other words, at a certain distance from their sun, their star, not too hot, and not too cold, like the Goldilocks fairy story in the porridge. We now are realizing that there are likely more planets in our galaxy than stars. Virtually every star we come across has some form of planetary system. And that makes a lot of sense, because before planetary systems come into being, such as ours, the harbingers of further complexity, the possibility of further complexity for the evolutionary journey of our universe, were there in interstellar clouds of gas and dust. So we can now realize that we've been able to identify virtually all the building blocks of biological life: lipids, sugars, amino acids, the harbingers of DNA, RNA, in interstellar dust clouds in our own galaxy, along with vast amounts of ice, bathed in ultraviolet light, and shepherded by interstellar magnetic fields. They're there. They can go so far to the edge of biological full life, but then it needs planetary systems and planets to be able to be the parents of that ongoing evolutionary journey. And that's a lot of what I write about in the story of Gaia.
It's really beautiful. And Christina, to your question, who is saying, for a beginning learner in this realm, what would you recommend that won't be overwhelming but educational nonetheless, both academically and spiritually? So I'll begin that answer with, check out Jude's books because they're really well written and they are very accessible. And the wonderful thing about a book is you can take it, you can read it, you can sit with it for a moment, reflect on it, find your inner answer, as well as reading the information that's being presented. And Jude does that in a beautiful way. And Jude, any other recommendations that you have?
Well, again, wholeworld-view.org has a lot of resources, Shamini, that people can explore and are very much invited to explore. And they're at different levels of sort of deep dives, from the sort of really, really accessible onwards. In my books, I also at the back have other resources. So there's some wonderful researchers out there. I love Suzanne Simard's work on mother trees. There's a wonderful work that Pollock's doing on what's called EZ water, which is another phase of water that's extraordinary. And I think it's going to be really important, in biofield research as well. So all of them. And there's so much more coming forward now. We do the list of all the podcasts I've done, or most of them that I've done over the last few months. And again, the podcast hosts are such a wonderful wide range of folks. So hopefully there'll be something for everyone in that range.
Beautiful. I love it. And so many resources are available and great recommendations on different books. I will get to the replay question in a minute, because if you didn't catch all of those recommendations, I'm sure you're going to come back to that and this conversation. But before we get to that question, here's a beautiful question. What would be a model for unitive education? Oh, and Jude, in just a couple of minutes, really. But anything that you would want to share on that? What is your perspective on what unitive education would be like?
Well, first of all, I'm doing a lot of work with a whole group of leading educators exactly on this. And we're coming forward, and it really is emergent. So again, watch this space over the coming months, but on a Unitive Education coalition. And probably what's going to be a good place to find how that emerges is on the SDG Thought Leader Circle website, which again, we can put in the links, I think. And if we look at the activities section on that website, it describes the Unitive thematic cluster work being done at the United Nations. It talks about the Unitive justice and global security work that's being done, and it's going to be in the next couple of weeks starting to share about the Unitive education work. And also there is that original SDG version of the Unitive Narrative on the same website. So it's a really good resource for seeing how things are moving, in these unitive perspectives as they apply to, whole world problems and potential opportunities. So with Unitive Education as well, there's a wonderful project called the Harmony Project UK, with a great website, and that's educational resources for educators and students from very early grades onwards, and that is now guided by a gentleman called Richard Dunn. And Richard worked with who's now King Charles, who worked with Charles when he was the Prince of Wales, and the Prince of Wales, King Charles, very much has a unitive awareness and supports unitive initiatives. So if you Google Harmony Project UK, again, there's some great resources there. Shamini, you're on mute.
Harmony Project UK, yes. And that brings us to a question. Lynn, I know that you're asking in the chat and here, and I just want to address this to you because I don't want you to feel ignored, because I know that we're putting in a lot of really wonderful links in the chat. And I know that people watching the replay aren't going to see this chat. And I understand that you want to copy these. The issue that we have is that we can't do that without everyone's permission, because everyone's full names, a lot of people's full names are in this chat. So just for like privacy and honoring people's privacy, we can't allow for this chat to be completely copied. But I will talk with the team, because what I would love to do is see if we can extract some of these links and send them back to you all. And this also leads to another procedural question somebody says about replaying the presentation on YouTube. So, and this is, sort of my answer to all of these things. There's also a question, a wonderful question about, can we start some kind of dialogue group among us? Because I love seeing, by the way, how many of you are so engaged, sharing resources in the chat. This is one of the things I love about our live gatherings, is that we all get a chance to connect and share. Everyone is holding a piece of wisdom. We are aware of these gaps, and we're doing our best to try to fill them. And as you know, one of the reasons we did stop the webinars for a while is because we were trying to make it work in a sustainable fashion. So with respect to the replays, as a social profit, we always want to make these available as much as possible to the general public. If you registered for this, you will receive a replay link that will be good for 24 hours, freely available for you to watch and share with others. If you would like to access this afterward, I hope that you would consider supporting the nonprofit. You get a tax-deductible donation. It's $9 a month, which is the cost of, I don't know, a smoothie or something, I guess. So if you feel that these dialogues are nourishing for you, as much as a smoothie would be once a month, and you want to be able to continue to support this for others as well, then we ask for you to really consider paying it forward and joining us as a Chi contributor for a mere $108 a year, which is a tax-deductible contribution. And where that goes is to essentially help support our back-end staff who are making these webinars happen, help us to go ahead and galvanize more support so we can have this interconnected discussion group, which I know a lot of you guys have been asking for. You wouldn't believe how much time and money it takes to do these things. It really, even the email systems, as our community grows, it's amazing, but then the email systems get really expensive too. So I hate to sort of bring up the reality of the economics, but since we started the beginning of this discussion talking about the regenerative economics, my invitation to each of you, if you have not joined as a Chi contributor, please do. And I think Jason will put it in the chat if he has, and it's just chi.is/join. You will get access to this beautiful conversation, resources from Jude, and more, as well as literally hundreds of hours of beautiful discussions like this, freely on demand, in perpetuity at any time, just as a thank you for our support. And I should mention that, as host and our guests, at this point, everyone is contributing their time. So the hosts that are coming here are contributing their time to share that knowledge with you. And believe me, a lot of them can earn a pretty penny for an hour discussion. And we're so, so grateful that you choose to donate your time for these webinars, for the public good and for our public benefit. And it's certainly my honor to help host them at no cost as well. So, Jude, I just want to thank you so much for your time, your energy, the incredible work that you're doing out in the world to help bring us to the unitive perspective so that we can really foster the transformational change that we know is possible, helping us wake up to each of our abilities for creative evolution. It's so wonderful. It's so meaningful. And on behalf of everyone, I just, again, want to thank you so much for spending your light and your wisdom and your energy with us today.
Bless you, Shamini. It's my honor and it's my delight. And I'm so grateful for everything that you and the team and the Chi community are doing, because as a human family, we need all of you and we need all of us coming together to link up and lift up and level up and light up together. So this is the time, and you're doing it so magnificently. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And everyone, don't forget to go to wholeworld-view.org, wholeworld-view.org to learn more from Jude as well. Thank you, everybody. Such a joy to be together. Looking forward to the next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.